Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network. We see another sensational headline. A Russian tanker spot off Ireland, supposedly smuggling sanctioned oil to India. But is it really that simple? Or is it maybe just another case of facts getting twisted for clicks? Today, we're going to unpack the complex reality behind these kinds of headlines. We're focusing on a global phenomenon that really impacts everything from the environment to international security, the shadow fleet. Our aim today is to give you a clear, informed picture of this, clandestine world of maritime trade. We'll explore where it came from, how it operates, the significant risks it poses, and crucially, what's being done to try and counter it. So to kick us off, what exactly is this shadow fleet we keep hearing about? I mean, is this a totally new thing that just popped up, or has something like it been around for a while?
That's a great question to start with because, the idea itself isn't brand new, but the scale we're seeing now, that's definitely unprecedented.
Right.
Essentially a shadow fleet, and you might hear it called a dark fleet or maybe a gray fleet. It's basically a hidden network of vessels. Their whole game is using deceptive tactics, smuggling sanctioned goods, and just expertly evading international rules and regulations. Historically, we've seen similar smaller operations for places like Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, trying to get around sanctions in the past. But what's really brought it into the spotlight recently is its direct link to the really comprehensive sanctions put on Russia's oil sector by the EU, G7, and allies after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Russia's motivation, it's pretty clear. They need to get around these embargoes and price caps. They want to sell their oil at market rates, basically to keep the money flowing.
Right. And the sheer scale of this growth, especially for Russia, it sounds absolutely massive. What kind of numbers are we actually talking about? How big has this fleet become?
It's quite startling, actually. Analysts like those at Kriepler saw this huge jump from around 370 sanctioned vessels back in July 2020 to an estimated 1,650 by July 2025. And it's still growing. BRS reports suggest the gray fleet part has been adding about 30 tankers a month just in 2025. This isn't some small-time thing either. Russia has reportedly invested something like $10 billion into building up this fleet. And the result? Well, in June 2024, this fleet carried a massive 70% of all Russia's seaborne oil exports. That breaks down to 89% of their crude oil and 38% of their oil products.
Wow, 70%.
Yeah, that one figure really tells you how vital this hidden network is to Russia's economy and, how hard it makes it for sanctions to really have the intended effect.
Okay, that does sound incredibly elaborate. I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around it. With all the technology we have, satellites, tracking systems,
Yeah.
how do these ships possibly stay hidden or avoid detection? Given all the oversight that usually exists in shipping, what are their tricks?
It really is a sophisticated game of cat and mouse, you could say. One of their main tools is using flags of convenience and something called identity laundering. Think about trying to track a car that keeps changing its license plate, its paint job, who it's registered to, like every few minutes. That's kind of what these shadow ships do. They frequently switch their registrations. That's the flag hopping part, moving between flag states known for, let's say, lax transparency or weak enforcement. We often hear about Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, sure, but it also includes smaller, maybe more obscure places like Aruba, Benin, Guyana, even Timor-Leste, Cambodia, Gabon. The list goes on. They can even create whole new fake identities for vessels or borrow clean ones from ships that aren't under scrutiny.
So that tanker, the Glue, the one spotted near Ireland, was that just a one-off weird incident, or is that a classic shadow fleet move?
Oh, that's a textbook example. The Blue. Records show it's had 4 different identities and has flown under 6 different flags just since 2020. Benin, Antigua and Barbuda, Liberia, Palau, Djibouti, Cyprus. 6 flags in just a few years. It makes tracking incredibly hard. And you see other examples like Barbados announcing in February 2025 it was kicking 46 ships linked to the Russian shadow fleet off its registry because of new UK sanctions. They recognize the issue. Or the Andaman Skies. Registered in the Cook Islands in 2023, then suddenly it's flagged in Honduras or Tanzania in 2024. These rapid changes are classic identity laundering. Another really key tactic is messing with the automatic identification system, the AIS, the system that broadcasts a ship's location publicly. These ships often just go dark. They turn off their AIS transponders to disappear from tracking screens, especially when they're doing something risky. That blue tanker near Ireland, reports say it switched off its AIS right before entering the Irish exclusive economic zone around August 8th, 2025.
Ah, okay.
And they also use spoofing. That's broadcasting false AI signals, pretending to be somewhere else or to be a different ship entirely or on a different journey. It's pure deception.
And what about these ship-to-ship transfers? That sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller, passing cargo between ships in the middle of the ocean. Is it really like that?
It's pretty much exactly like that. High seas maneuvers, often in remote areas. They transfer the cargo, usually oil, from one vessel to another, sometimes doing it multiple times to really muddy the waters about where the oil originally came from. They might even blend oil from different sources. And crucially, they do this out in international waters, far from ports, where they might face inspections that could reveal the sanctioned origin of the cargo.
Right.
Common spots for this are around Malaysia, parts of the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea.
And the ownership. How do they hide who actually owns these ships? I imagine it's not easy to trace back.
It's not at all. It's deliberately murky. They use really complex, multi-layered ownership structures, often involving shell companies set up in places with very little corporate transparency. Back in 2023, places like the UAE, China, and India were highlighted as key locations providing management services for these kinds of vessels. This opacity makes finding the true beneficial owner almost impossible. It's like a corporate shell game. And one last thing, which is quite significant, they generally don't have standard Western insurance, and they rely heavily on older ships. Most operate without P&I, that's protection and indemnity insurance from the big, reputable clubs in the international group, which cover something like 90% of the world's shipping. Instead, they get insurance from obscure or offshore providers, like the Andaman Skies was reportedly insured by a Russian company called Soglasi, and many are old vessels, often over 15, sometimes over 20 years old ships that would normally be heading for the scrapyard. The Andaman Skies, for example, built in 2004, had just hit that 20-year service mark, which is actually an important age limit for some Indian regulations. Using these older, less valuable ships means if they get caught or have an accident, the financial loss for the owners is much lower. It's about cutting potential losses.
Okay, this part really underscores why this matters to everyone. Beyond just dodging sanctions, what are the actual dangers these fleets pose? For the environment, for other ships, for coastal areas? This feels like much more than just a regulatory headache.
You're absolutely right. The dangers are serious and wide-ranging, far beyond just sanctions evasion. Let's start with the environment. The fact that, over 72% of these shadow tankers are over 15 years old and often poorly maintained. That drastically bumps up the risk of mechanical failures, collisions, and the nightmare scenario, a massive oil spill. Many skip mandatory safety surveys, remember the Andaman Skies, reportedly turned away by India because it lacked recognized seaworthiness certificates. The China Classification Society actually withdrew its class status earlier in 2025. The replacement Dakar class wasn't recognized in India.
So they're basically uncertified, potentially unsafe ships carrying huge amounts of oil.
Exactly, and that creates a huge risk for spills, especially in really sensitive areas like the Baltic Sea or the North Sea, which are crowded shipping zones. Plus, because they lack that proper P&I insurance from major clubs, getting emergency funds for cleanup after a spill is often delayed or maybe impossible. So who picks up the bill?
Yeah.
Usually it falls on national governments, meaning taxpayers like you and me. Think about this. In August 2023, nearly 3/4 of all Russian crude moving by sea had no Western insurance cover.
Wow.
So it's not just a potential environmental disaster, it's a massive hidden financial risk for everyone else.
That's a huge point. And beyond the environment, what about just basic safety at sea for other mariners?
Yes, absolutely. There are major maritime safety risks. When ships switch off their AIs or spoof their location and then conduct risky ship-to-ship transfers, often in busy shipping lanes, well, it creates huge navigational hazards for everyone else.
It sounds like chaos.
It's incredibly dangerous. Imagine driving on a motorway at night and suddenly lots of cars just turn off their lights. Plus, the crews on these often substandard ships, they face increased dangers themselves. We've already tracked over 50 incidents involving Russia's shadow fleet, things like fires, engine failures, collisions, losing steering control, oil spills. Remember, the Andromeda Star, it collided with another ship in March 2024. Luckily, it wasn't carrying oil then. Or the Canis Power, which lost engine power near Denmark in February 2023, an inspection found 11 critical safety faults. And we're seeing more ships refusing to take mandatory pilots on board in tricky areas like the Danish Straits. That number apparently jumped from 1 in 20 ships refusing to 1 in 5 by July 2024. That just adds another layer of risk in already dangerous waters.
And this goes beyond accidental risk too, right? There were mentions of potential national security threats, maybe even a kind of hybrid warfare.
That's a really serious concern, yes. Naval and defense experts, people like Sweden's General Michael Biden and Rear Admiral Iwa Skud Haslam, and Latvia's Foreign Minister Baiba Braja, they raised alarms about this back in June 2024. They worry that some of these shadow tankers might be doing more than just carrying oil, maybe surveillance, intelligence gathering near critical undersea infrastructure, infrastructure, that sort of thing. Some reports even suggest tankers equipped with communication interception gear.
That's chilling.
It is. And there's this warning that Russia could potentially deliberately cause an environmental disaster, maybe stage an accident in a key choke point like the Danish Straits as a form of hybrid warfare. Because the fleet operates deceptively and uses old, risky ships, proving intent would be incredibly difficult. And lastly, don't forget the risks for legitimate commercial shipping. Private companies, ports, insurers, they all face huge economic and legal penalties if they unknowingly get tangled up in sanctions evasion because of these deceptive practices. It forces the whole industry to conduct much more extensive due diligence, checking and double-checking who they're dealing with, and that naturally drives up costs across the board, which eventually impacts global supply chains and maybe even the prices you pay.
Okay, so given this massive scale, all these risks, what does it mean for global trade? And for the efforts to control it? Where is all this sanctioned oil actually ending up?
Well, the main destinations for the crude oil moved by this shadow fleet are pretty clear: India, China, and Turkey. Together, they took something like 95% of Russia's seaborne crude exports back in May 2024. For petroleum products, Brazilian buyers have also become quite prominent. And it's worth coming back to that Andaman Skies incident again on March 27, 2025. It was reportedly refused entry at an oil terminal in Vadanar, India, specifically because of improper documentation.
Ah, so even the big buyers have lines they won't cross.
It seems so. It highlights this interesting dynamic. India is a major buyer and officially only recognizes UN sanctions, not unilateral ones from the UK or EU. But they still have their own national regulations regarding ship safety, age, and documentation that even shadow fleet vessels sometimes can't meet. And in terms of routes, we've seen huge increases in shadow tanker traffic through key maritime choke points, the Danish Straits, a 277% increase between January and August 2024 compared to 2022 levels. They estimate 103 billion worth of oil passed through there just between January 2023 and mid-2024.
Incredible numbers.
Yeah. The Dover and Gibraltar Straits saw a 355% jump. The Suez Canal, a staggering 649% increase. Even the Korean Strait saw volumes up by 351%, and that blue tanker near Ireland, it was likely headed for India, taking that longer route around the west coast specifically to avoid the English Channel. Why? Probably because UK authorities there might be stricter about checking insurance papers. It shows how they actively plan routes to minimize enforcement risk.
Right, so with ships flitting between flags, going dark, using shell companies, and moving globally, enforcing sanctions and controlling this must be incredibly difficult. What are the biggest hurdles authorities are up against?
You've hit the nail on the head. It is immensely challenging, almost like trying to contain smoke. First off, you have major legal gray areas. A lot of this activity, especially the ship-to-ship transfers, happens on the high seas, which is outside any single country's direct jurisdiction. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, NCLOS, the sort of constitution for the oceans, guarantees rights like innocent passage through territorial waters. That makes it legally tricky to just stop and board a vessel unless you can prove a clear, immediate threat. Plus, there's no official, internationally agreed-upon list or registry for risky ships.
So defining who is bad is hard in itself.
Exactly. Second, there's no single global police force for the oceans. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, sets the rules, but it doesn't have its own enforcement arm. Enforcement is left to individual flag states, the countries where ships are registered. And as we've seen, many flags used by the shadow fleet have, let's say, variable levels of diligence or capacity to act. Third, Western governments face this constant tension, this balancing act. They want to cut off Russia's oil money, absolutely, but they're also really worried about destabilizing the global oil market.
The price spike concern.
Precisely. There's a real fear that if all Russian oil suddenly disappeared from the market, prices could shoot up maybe to $200 a barrel. Some analysts warn which would have severe consequences for the global economy. Fourth, you've got major global players, countries like India, China, Turkey, Brazil, who are either officially neutral or want to maintain trade ties with Russia for their own economic reasons. They aren't necessarily aligning with Western sanctions. Fifth, the sheer sophistication and constant evolution of the evasion tactics. The flag hopping, AIS tricks, complex ownership means enforcement agencies are always playing catch up. It requires huge resources just to keep track. And finally, effective surveillance, tracking, and enforcement demand significant, sustained resources and political will across many countries. And that's not always easy to achieve or maintain over the long haul.
Okay, given that whole list of really significant challenges, what is actually being done? Is the international community managing to push back at all? against this network? Are there any successes?
Despite all those hurdles, yes, there are definitely efforts underway. It shows there's a growing international recognition of the scale of the problem. For example, the EU's 14th sanctions package back in June 2024 specifically listed 27 vessels, including 17 tankers known to be part of Russia's shadow fleet. Those ships are now banned from EU ports and can't access services there.
Targeting specific ships.
Exactly. The US and UK have similar targeted sanctions. And the EU's special envoy, David O'Sullivan, is reportedly actively working to trace and sanction the smaller front companies that help facilitate this trade, trying to hit the network behind the ships. Also, the EU's 12th sanctions package from December 2023 brought in measures to monitor the sale of old tankers to third countries more closely. The aim there is to try and stop ships being bought specifically to join the shadow fleet and circumvent the price cap. There's also better information sharing happening, mandated among EU member states with support from MSA, the European Maritime Safety Agency, and coordination happens internationally through groups like the Sanctions Coordinators Forum. Diplomatic pressure is being applied too, talking to flag states that host these ships and to the countries buying the oil. That decision by Barbados to deflag those 46 ships in February 2025, that was likely a result of such pressure.
And what about the big international bodies like the IMO? Are they stepping up?
They are, albeit perhaps cautiously. The IMO adopted a resolution non-binding, importantly back on December 6, 2023. But it was significant because it officially defined the term dark fleet and signaled there's an appetite, at least among some members, for developing new ways to tackle it. More practically, on December 16, 2024, we saw Denmark, working with the Nordic-Baltic 8 group, Germany, and the UK, announce new joint measures. These include things like demanding proof of valid insurance from ships suspected of being part of the shadow fleet when they pass through key areas like the English Channel or the Danish Straits. Greece has also been more assertive recently, cracking down on illegal ship-to-ship transfers in the Laconian Gulf near its coast. And looking ahead, experts are suggesting even stronger steps. Things like requiring fully audited financial statements to prove oil spill insurance is legitimate, establishing clear financial liability for everyone involved in a cargo transfer, not just the ship owner. Some even propose, maybe as a last resort, physically intercepting vessels that pose a clear and immediate environmental or safety threat. And there are ongoing calls for much stricter due diligence across the entire maritime industry, and maybe even banning ship-to-ship transfers altogether within territorial waters or exclusive economic zones.
So a range of actions, from diplomatic to potentially quite forceful.
Right. It shows the issue is being taken seriously, even if finding universally effective solutions remains really tough.
So as we wrap up this discussion about this ongoing high-stakes game of cat and mouse on the high seas, what's the main thing that stands out to you? What's the key takeaway our listeners should mull over?
For me, the really striking thing is how the continued growth and, frankly, the increasing sophistication of this shadow fleet forces us to confront a fundamental tension. It's this conflict between, on one hand, the global need for stable energy markets, keeping oil flowing and prices manageable, and on the other hand, the absolute imperative to uphold international law, enforce sanctions, and mitigate these growing environmental and security risks we've talked about. It really makes you question whether our existing international maritime rules, mostly designed for a different geopolitical era, are actually fit for purpose now, especially in an age where state actors seem willing and able to deliberately exploit the gray zones within that framework for their own strategic and economic advantage. It's a profound challenge to global governance, really.
Thank you for tuning in and joining us for this important discussion today. We really hope this exploration has given you a clearer picture of the hidden, complex world of the shadow fleet. If you found this conversation valuable, please do take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Global WarWatch Network. Your engagement truly helps us bring these crucial global security topics to a wider audience. And we genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Please share your insights or questions in the comment section below. You can also join the conversation on our social media channels. You'll find all the links right there in the description. Thanks again for listening.